Hello and welcome back to Bookish. Today it's Saturday, so I'm here with another Saturday Hodgepodge in which I just talk about, book stuff I've been reading, stuff like that. The last book I read in October was A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf. This I read as a part of Mel's, from Mel's Bookland Adventures, Gone with the Book read along, where at the end of each month you choose a classic work of literature from the first half of the 20th century, and that just sounded perfect. This book sounded perfect for me for that because I'd also watched Claudia's video in which she kind of had read A Room of One's Own recently and kind of challenged people to read it and suggesting it was something that everybody should read. I'll leave links to those videos down below, but I wanted to talk a little bit about A Room of One's Own. So A Room of One's Own is essentially an essay that Virginia Woolf wrote on the subject of women and fiction, or women in literature, can't remember exactly which, in which she uses an incredibly arched style of writing and irony, and, today what we might even call a little bit of snark, to cover this issue of why, apparently what she was asked to write is why women in literature was a new thing during the time period which she lived in the early part of the 20th century, and maybe then why there hadn't been more women writers before. I think today we probably kind of know the answer to that better than people back then thought, because I'd like to think that we are more advanced in our thinking about gender roles than people during Virginia Woolf's lifetime would have been. But certainly, what she points out is that at the time of Shakespeare it was impossible, essentially, for a woman to be a writer because she was not in control of herself, she wasn't in control of who she married, she wasn't in control of where she lived, what she did for a living, that she spent a lot of time having kids, taking care of those kids, that she didn't have any space of her own, she didn't have any time of her own, she wasn't given access to education, and therefore we shouldn't be surprised that in the 16th century there are virtually no women writers. She imagines Shakespeare having a sister, and what would have happened if Shakespeare's sister had had a gift for writing and desire to write. Shortcut. It was a lot different than what happened to Shakespeare. She then goes on eventually to get to the great 19th century female novelists, Jane Austen, the Bronte sisters, George Eliot, all feature here as kind of heroes, I think, of writing women who had the audacity to not only imagine that they could write and be successful at it, but to write, as Virginia Woolf would say, like women, instead of trying to write like women trying to write like men. And that they kind of laid the groundwork for women writers moving on. But she points out that even like in her own time, and I think this is probably still true today, there are significant barriers to women being able to write. And she kind of sums this up by saying that for women to be able to write, they need a room of one's own and enough income to support themselves. This then would give them the freedom, the space, the freedom from distraction to actually write. And she brings up a number of issues about this. Obviously, as I said earlier, women being denied educational opportunities, women being denied the opportunity to publish. Notice that, the Brontes originally published under a pseudonym, as did, George Eliot published under a pseudonym, a male pseudonym, so they could get their works into fiction. That even then, academics, critics didn't believe that women really had a gift for writing. Even once women started writing, oftentimes men critics, or male critics, academics and others, dismissed their writing as though the subject of the writing was trivial, even though what they were saying is the subject of the writing was trivial to them as men. And Woolf rightly points out there's nothing more trivial about, even if what a woman wanted to write about was talking about shopping, that's not more trivial than a man writing about soccer or football. That those are equal, and there really isn't such a thing as a trivial subject. But even then, those women, and the women in the early part of the 20th century and the late part of the 19th century, had to overcome this kind of sneering attitude about women writers and about what they wrote, and about whether what they wrote about was serious and how they wrote, and they really had to overcome a lot of these things. And I think fortunately, hopefully, we've moved beyond that. But a number of things she brought up in the essay kind of bothered me. Not because I thought she was wrong, but because for a long time I've kind of liked to think of myself and congratulate myself as being one of the non-caveman men running around the world, and believing that women and men are equal, that what women write about is equally valuable, that a woman's time and a man's time should be equal, that within marriage women and men should be equal. But a number of disturbing things were kind of brought up about this, particularly just about the concept of a room of one's own. And I think some evidence of, my own kind of white male privileged attitude, even present in the location where I shoot these videos. I mean, after all, this room is considered my study. It has all of my things in it. It doesn't kind of meet the standard of what most men mean when they say man cave, but from the very beginning, when we moved in this house, I claimed this space, I claimed this study for myself, and it occurred to me in reading this that my wife doesn't have same space. She is working to create a space for her creative projects in another room since our kids are growing up and moving off. But, that's been 16 years ago. And it never, it just didn't occur to me until recently that there was something inherently unfair about that and unfair about this. I was teaching my class, I teach an American history class, about the growth of the middle class and middle class values in the United States, which, by the way, kind of closely attempted to mirror Victorian values. And those values suggested, as I read in the Queen Victoria biography, that women should subjugate themselves to men, that they should let men be the leaders and decision makers. And I oftentimes lecture about how in the middle class home of the time period it became an idealized vision of what life should be like, with women responsible primarily for most of the decisions about child rearing and food and cooking and decorating, and their job was to create an enriching atmosphere for their kids and to create a comfortable, safe haven, a place of escape for their husbands. Notice in that there's nothing said about what the home should be like for women, that it's a woman's job to maintain the home like that for others, and as Virginia Woolf would argue, that means she doesn't have time for herself to engage in her own creative endeavors. And as much as I like to think that, being someone who was raised by a fiercely independent working mother, and I have a fiercely independent working sister, I believed, that this wasn't me, that I didn't have those kind of leave it to beaver attitudes about marriage and middle class life. And then the more I thought about it, the more I realized that maybe subconsciously, consciously, out of laziness, I do. The study here isn't the only thing, but, for instance, I have a chair, I have a recliner, and it's my chair. I sit in it. I've had a recliner ever since I've been married, and it really wasn't until 7 or 8 years ago that my wife also had a recliner, which is just ridiculous because she works. As a matter of fact, she makes far more money than I do, and it's caused me to question these things that I've always thought to be true about myself and about my attitude towards men and women and husbands and wives. Why did I accept that was okay? Why is that normal? Why is that even something necessarily that my wife apparently accepted as a part of our society? Why do we accept these things as true? Why does it seem like we value men's time more than women's time? And that's kind of the point that Virginia Woolf is getting at here. The book made me uncomfortable with the idea that, for how long did I trivialize books by women by assuming that they were about things that only women would be interested in and that those things weren't very important? It's not that I ignored women writers in my 20s, but I probably didn't think seriously about reading, Jane Austen or the Brontes or anything else like that until relatively recently in my life. And was I dismissing them because I just believed that their subject was romance or love or marriage, and these were things I didn't think necessarily made for serious literature? All these things bother me, that I maybe thought about those things. And my final thought, and I don't know if I saw it in Claudia's video or if I saw it somewhere else, the final thing, that I had an urge to say to Virginia Woolf as reading the book was, well, that's not me. I'm not one of those men who don't think women have anything to say, who don't think women are intellectually equal. I don't think that women can't write. And it occurred to me, or because I heard someone say it or heard this discussion, that men like me who rush to, raise our hand and have call attention to the fact that we're not like that, we're kind of demanding that we be treated like individuals. Well, that's, in lots of ways, that's a product of white male privilege. You know, we don't like being lumped together in a negative way, and yet, you know, women and minorities and religious minorities and the LGBTQ plus population have frequently been lumped together with no thoughts of individuality of the very groups who now we want to say, well, that's not me. You know, yes, I acknowledge that men are like that, but not me. You know, even that desire to call attention to how we're not a part of the problem is in some ways a symptom of the problem, that we feel like we have the right to be excluded from the group when we didn't afford those same rights, or have not and don't afford those same rights to other groups. Anyway, obviously a lot of thoughts sparked by A Room of One's Own. It was a great book. It was a great read. Virginia Woolf's style is entertaining. It's not the least bit dry. There's humor. It's funny. It's just a really good book, and I'm glad I read it. So thanks to Claudia for creating that challenge, challenging me to read it. I definitely felt like I learned a lot, and it made me ask a lot of questions, which at sometimes are uncomfortable. Also, since today is November the 2nd, NaNoWriMo started yesterday. If you watched my video in which I finally announced my Victober TBR, then you know that I kind of had questions about whether or not I was going to go forward with NaNoWriMo. I got up and went to work early today and used the time before my first class came in to begin the process of writing, and then I wrote a little bit at lunch. So I did actually get started on my NaNoWriMo project, but I only made it to about, I think, 1,320 words. I'm not going to get to the 1,667 or however many words you're supposed to do every day. I finished the first kind of introductory chapter to the book that I'm writing, and I know for sure where I want to start tomorrow, and I'm going to follow, I think, a piece of Hemingway advice, and I'm going to stop at a place where I know where I'm going to start tomorrow. That's kind of a paraphrasing of Hemingway's writing advice, but he essentially said, never stop when you've run out of things to write. You know, stop so that you have a starting place the next time. And I definitely have a starting place for today when I do finally find the time to sit down and do some writing. So NaNoWriMo has started for me. We'll see how far I can go or how many words I can get done. Obviously, I failed to meet the word count for day one. Also in these videos, I like to do shout-outs. I want to shout out a channel who I don't think I've shouted out before, but you know, this is the 9th one of these, and I'm bound to repeat some shout-outs sooner or later. That just means those channels are doubly good. The channel I want to shout out today is I Never Promised You a Prose Garden. Jennifer is the creator over there at that channel. I enjoy her taste in books. I enjoy her take on the books she reads. I think she is a great booktuber who definitely deserves to have more subscribers than I do. So I'll leave a link to her channel down below. You know, give it a look and see what you think. I think you'll like her channel, her taste in books, and her approach to BookTube. So I promised you that I would finish off this video with some dog footage. So here's some footage of my dogs essentially talking. This came about because Greg over at Supposedly Fun said that his dogs, Jameson and Guinness, had heard my dogs on a video and they wanted to talk to Zelda and Ike. So I tried to get some footage of Zelda and Ike talking. By the way, Ike talking is just Ike barking at an ear-piercingly loud volume. Zelda actually has conversations, even though I couldn't get her to say very much today. I'm going to include that dog footage so you can see my dogs here.
Woo, woo. Oh, speak, Zelda. Zelda, speak, Zelda, speak, Zelda, no.
As always, I look forward to the comments in the comment section below, and thank you for watching.